and then he tried to charm the continent. Did it work? We will discuss. On the other side of the globe, Taiwan has launched its biggest ever war games. Will this deter China or provoke it further? Meanwhile, the Red Sea is on fire. Houthis have now sunk 2 more ships. Global shipping is under siege and no one seems to have a solution. In Kenya, the protests have turned deadly. What does it mean for President Ruto? In Europe, a nuclear shift. Britain and France strike a deal. Is this the start of a European nuclear umbrella, independent of America? Also tonight, Russia's vodka problem. Production is falling. What's behind this decline in the national spirit? And on this Guru Purnima, who are the guiding lights in our lives? What makes a teacher timeless? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal indicts former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina over alleged crimes against humanity. This comes as the country's former police chief pleads guilty to that charge and agrees to act as a witness. The case relates to the crackdown on protesters during last year's student uprising, which led to Hasina's ouster. Pakistan police raid a scam call centre and arrest 149 people. This includes 71 foreigners who are mostly Chinese citizens. The raid took place in Faisalabad, which is a manufacturing hub. The victims would receive a small return on their initial investments and then be persuaded to hand over larger sums of money. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio meets Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Rubio says Lavrov shared a quote-unquote new idea on the Ukraine war during their meeting, which was held on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit in Malaysia. Moscow says the two diplomats also discussed restoring economic ties between the US and Russia. Sweden's migration minister under fire over his son's far-right links, but he has ruled out resigning. His teenage son has been linked to white supremacist groups. Currently, Sweden has a centre-right minority government, which has been accused of overlooking far-right extremism. And European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen survives a confidence vote. The censure motion was tabled by a far-right faction. Von der Leyen had dismissed it as an attempt to divide Europe, calling its supporters apologists for Russian President Putin. But the rare challenge has exposed frictions over her leadership style. There's an old saying in Silicon Valley, in a gold rush, do not dig for gold, sell the shovels. In today's AI gold rush, everyone is chasing the gold. Companies are pivoting to artificial intelligence, but Nvidia is selling the shovels. It is this company that is powering the AI pivot, and their strategy is paying off. This week, Nvidia briefly touched the $4 trillion market cap, $4 trillion in market value for a single company. If it were a country, it would sit between India and Japan among the top 5 economies in the world. And that tells you something. Nvidia is the first ever company to reach this milestone. Its market value is more than several nations combined. And this is a very big deal for the tech world, probably the biggest news since Apple launched the iPhone. Apple became the first company to reach $3 trillion. Nvidia has now taken a step further, and the market believes it's only an upward trajectory for now. Why is this our lead story tonight? Because this is not just a market story. This is a moment that captures the shape of the future, the age of artificial intelligence, the new world order of tech power. It shows how a graphics card company became the engine of the global economy. In 2015, Nvidia was worth less than $20 billion. In 2020, it was at a little over $300 billion. Today, it is $4 trillion. That's a 40x jump in 5 years. In the year 2000, one Nvidia share was going for less than $1. Today, it's worth around $3,000. Had you bought a few hundred shares 25 years ago, you'd be rolling in money today, probably ready to retire. But back then, not many people saw this coming. Even Nvidia did not set out to lead the AI revolution. Their story began in 1993 with a man named Jensen Huang. He was sitting in a California diner with his two co-founders. They wanted to make a graphics chip, something that powers video games. That's what they wanted to make. So Huang and his team came up with a name, Nvision. But this name was already taken, so they settled on another one, Nvidia. It is derived from the Latin invidia, which means envy. 30 years on, their competitors are truly green with envy. But it hasn't always been this good. If you chart Nvidia's market cap over time, the early years look like a flat line. In 1995, the company almost went bust. A key chip release failed. Nvidia was nearly bankrupt. But after that, it steadied, although it was still making only graphic processing units or GPUs for video games. Then in 2013 came the big pivot. Jensen Huang noticed something. GPUs were good for machine learning, so he bet on it. Wall Street thought that this was a foolish idea. Investors were not so sure, but Huang was convinced that this was the future, and he was right. Machine learning took off, and how? And Nvidia had the first mover's advantage. It now powers the Mars rovers, autonomous surgery, and ChatGPT. But here's what most people miss about Nvidia. It's not just a chip maker, it is also a software company, and their secret weapon is something called CUDA. Compute Unified Device Architecture, CUDA. It is kind of an operating system for GPUs. If you want to build an AI model today, you need CUDA, and CUDA only runs on Nvidia, which allows Nvidia to dominate the market. It builds the chip, and it builds the system it runs on. Let's also tell you about the man behind all of this, Jensen Huang. His company may be number 1, but Huang has an employee ID of number 3. He gave the first 2 to his co-founders, and he's become a cult figure in Silicon Valley. Journalists compare him to both Steve Jobs and Taylor Swift in the same breath. At AI conferences, he is a headliner. His presentations are more like concerts. Nvidia earnings reports now have watch parties. People tune in just for the hype. But of course, it's not a bed of roses. Earlier this year, Nvidia lost $600 billion in market value, that too in just one session, $600 billion lost. The reason was a Chinese AI startup called DeepSeek. It developed a rival AI model. This model also uses Nvidia chips, by the way, and yet the company bled money. And then there's China, of course. The US has heavily restricted chip sales to Beijing, and this has hit Nvidia. The company lost out on $2.5 billion in additional revenue from what they would have sold to China and Chinese companies. Now Nvidia cannot sell in China. And finally, there are other competitors, the likes of AMD, Advanced Micro Devices. It is challenging Nvidia's dominance. Interestingly, the person running this company, AMD, is Jensen Huang's cousin, Lisa Hu. Yes, family dinners get competitive. But here's the existential question. What happens when a company reaches $4 trillion? What happens when they are the market? Where do they go from there? Because history shows tech empires rise fast and fall faster. Just ask IBM or Intel. Intel was once a dominant force in the semiconductor industry. Now it's not even in the footnotes. Does Nvidia face a similar future? Well, the fact is, no company, no one is truly invincible. But here's where Nvidia might be different from Intel. It's not just building a product, it is also building infrastructure. In the 20th century, power belonged to oil companies. In the early 2000s, it shifted to internet platforms. They said data was the new oil. Today, power lies with whoever controls intelligence. And right now, that is Nvidia. This company is not just making chips, it is shaping wars, it is retooling medicine and redrawing global power equations. That is too much power and too much money in the hands of a private company. We say it's both thrilling and terrifying.
Americans, we've been treated very unfairly by both friend and foe.
There's absurd, there's nonsensical, and then there is Donald Trump's tariffs. Now, we have seen leaders try ridiculous things before, but with such conviction, probably not. Trump is back to writing his tariff letters. He wrote 14 of them, 14 such letters earlier this week, and yesterday he wrote 8 more. To Brazil, Sri Lanka, to Algeria, Brunei, Iraq, Moldova, Libya, and the Philippines. All 8 countries got a letter from Donald Trump saying what? That they faced new tariffs on August 1st. Now, most of these rates are different from the old ones. For example, look at Brazil. They faced 10% tariffs in April this year. Now they face 50% tariffs, 50% tariffs on Brazil. Sri Lanka is down from 44% to 30%. Libya is almost the same at 30%. And the Philippines has gone up from 17 to 20%. Iraq is down from 39% to 30%. Why have these rates changed? Nobody knows. But these new letters make 2 things clear. One, nobody is safe from Donald Trump. Not tiny islands, not war-torn countries, no one. And secondly, forget logic and economic sense. These tariffs are not about correcting trade imbalances. These are political and absurd decisions, really. Just consider the case of Brazil. Trump bumped up their tariff from 10% to 50%. Why? Because he does not like their president, Lula da Silva. You see, Trump is a big fan of his predecessor, Lula's predecessor, a man named Jair Bolsonaro. He's currently being investigated for a coup attempt. But Trump feels that this is a witch hunt. Let me quote from his letter. The way Brazil has treated former President Jair Bolsonaro, a highly respected leader, is an international disgrace. The trial should not be taking place. It is a witch hunt that should end immediately. Nothing to see here. Just Donald Trump ordering a sovereign nation. But Lula is having none of it. Listen to his response.
Brazil is a sovereign nation with independent institutions and will not accept any form of tutelage. Sovereignty, respect, and the unwavering defense of the interests of the Brazilian people are the values that guide our relationship with the world.
The meddling is not even the worst part, because guess what? Brazil does not have a trade surplus with America. Let me pull up the US government's website. US exports to Brazil are worth $49 billion. And Brazil's exports to the US, $42 billion. So the US has a trade surplus with Brazil. Then what imbalance is President Trump trying to correct? Let's look at Iraq next. US exports to Iraq stand at $1.7 billion. US imports from Iraq at $7.4 billion. So the US does have a trade deficit here. I wonder why that is. Why aren't Iraqis buying Boeing planes or AI chips? Could it be because the US invaded them? Because 20,000 bombs were dropped on them? Because 500,000 people were killed? Because the US destabilized the country? Or maybe we are wrong. Maybe Iraq just wants to spite Donald Trump. Then we come to Libya, another country visited by American freedom fighters. They toppled the Libyan regime in the year 2011. Today, this country is in a state of civil war. US trade with Libya is just $2 billion, which is 0.02% of America's total trade. Yet they face 30% tariffs. If you think that is absurd, look at Moldova. Tiny country, just under 3 million people. Moldova's trade with America, around $180 million. Again, we did the math. That's 0.002% of total US trade. Yet Moldova faces 25% tariffs. What do all these examples tell you? This is not about correcting trade imbalances. It's not about fair trade. It's about bullying countries to please your voters. And it is based on flawed economics. Trump claims that a trade deficit is bad. He says other countries are ripping America off. But the fact is, most countries have a trade deficit. Should all of them start imposing tariffs? They won't, because they have better leaders. All Trump is doing is unleashing unnecessary pain. We know what happened in April. When he announced the tariffs, the markets plunged. US stocks lost $3 trillion in value. And this is not Donald Trump's money. This money belonged to ordinary Americans. He destabilized the stock markets. He destabilized the oil markets. He destabilized the currency markets. And for what? To announce extension after extension. It's time the world ganged up and called out Donald Trump. If he wants to ruin America, fine, be our guest. But leave the rest of the world alone. We have bigger priorities than renaming water bodies, plastic straws, and shower pressure. Here's a tiny tale featuring an ex, the one who laughed at you, who made fun of your behavior, who ghosted you for months. Now that ex is back, this time with flashy clothes and better words, and he says, we should meet again. That's the story. And it also sums up Trump's Africa summit. I'll tell you why. The US president has invited 5 African leaders to the White House, 5 out of a continent of 54 countries. And which are these 5 countries? Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mauritania, and Senegal. This is the hand-picked group. These are countries with minerals and migration issues. These are also the smaller economies of Africa. So these are the kind of partners who are more likely to say yes to your demands, the ones who are less likely to walk out at the sign of a conflict. Because that's the thing about a gaslighter. They love an uneven power dynamic. So Trump invited them for a summit. The summit will go on for 3 days, but the US president seems to have lost his patience on day 1 itself.
And we have a lot of resources in our seawater, so lots of fishing and whatnot. I don't want to spend too much time on this.
And we have to go. But I appreciate it very much. I appreciate it. Maybe we're going to have to go a little bit quicker than this because we have a whole schedule.
Be a little quicker. That's what Trump is telling an African leader. Yes, he's just being himself. Here's what happened at the lunch table. The African leaders took turns. They were singing praises of Donald Trump. They were pitching projects. One of them even invited Trump to build a golf course. And yes, they also brought up the Nobel Peace Prize.
I believe
that he does deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. That is my opinion on this.
Il mérite ce prix Nobel.
Very nice. Thank you. I didn't know I'd be treated this nicely. This is great. We could do this all day long. Thank you very much. Please, go ahead.
So the US president soaked it all up, but moments later, he cut off one of the leaders mid-speech, asking him to be a bit quicker because Trump had a whole schedule. This is classic Trump. Bask in all the compliments, but check your watch when the other side makes demands. Why is he meeting them at all? Trump's motto for Africa is quite clear: trade, not aid. And that per se is not the problem. It's the approach. The US president does not care about how Africa is doing. He's just scanning the room to see who has something he needs.
And we're working tirelessly to forge new economic opportunities involving both the United States and many African nations. There's great economic potential in Africa, like few other places in many ways. In the long run, this will be far more effective and sustainable and beneficial than anything else that we can be doing together.
This is not a partnership, it's a transaction wrapped in flattery. And Trump took it too far with a backhanded compliment. Listen to what he said to the president of Liberia.
We want to work with the United States in peace and security within the region because we are committed to that. And we just want to thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you. It's such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully? Where were you educated? Where?
Yes,
In Liberia.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting. That's beautiful English.
Sure.
I have people at this table can't speak nearly as well,
Very
and
good, sir. Thank you.
they come from here. So thank you very much.
That was Liberian President Joseph Boakai. He talked about partnering with the US, but guess what Trump heard? English. An African leader speaking in English. So Trump, being Trump, asked him where he learned the language. And the answer surprised him even more. Trump could not believe it was Liberia. It was obviously very tone deaf. It betrayed his lack of sensitivity and basic homework. So here's some historical trivia for US President Trump. Liberia was founded in 1822 by the American Colonization Society. This was to resettle freed American slaves. The country declared independence in 1847. English is the official language of Liberia, so their leader speaking English should not be a surprise. But this episode is telling. It shows what the US thinks of the African continent, and Trump has a history of doing this, by the way. In 2018, he made headlines for his vulgar dismissal of African nations. He mocked African accents. He cut aid programs. He's asked where certain countries are located, and now he wants a fresh start. The reason for this is China and Russia. They're making inroads in Africa. They're gaining turf, and Trump does not want to be left out. In fact, the leader of Gabon even mentioned it during the summit.
Our country is free, open to one and all. You are welcome to come and invest. Otherwise, other countries might come instead of you. Thank you.
Also, the countries he invited sit on top of some of the world's richest deposits. Gabon alone holds nearly a quarter of the world's manganese. Senegal wants to build a tech city. Liberia wants to host a US military facility. All of them have something to offer to Donald Trump. So this was less a diplomatic outreach and more of a sales pitch, not to understand Africa, but to leverage it. Because when Trump looks at Africa, he does not see people or partners or potential. He sees a map of resources and market access. Of course, Africa has been here before. Smooth words, shiny contracts, strategic partnerships, and friendships. The promises from Trump may sound new, but the power play is the same old story. Taiwan has turned into a fortress. It is hosting its biggest ever military drill. 10 days, cutting-edge weapons and round-the-clock action. Their mission? To defend against a possible Chinese invasion. These drills involve all three services of Taiwan's military, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force. It will also rope in the reservists, some 22,000 people who are in the backup. The first phase of this drill is all about surviving the initial attack. Let's say China cripples Taiwan's communication. Then how will Taiwanese commanders speak to each other? How will they coordinate their actions? This first phase focuses on answering that. The reserve troops were seen in civilian areas, including schools. They received inputs on handling guns. Later on, the drills will expand. They will feature 24-hour operations on land, on sea and in the air. They will focus on anti-landing operations. Why anti-landing? You see, Taiwan and China are separated by water. The distance between them is 160 kilometers. So if China wants to annex Taiwan, they will have to land there. which is what Taiwan is preparing for. They have identified possible landing points. These drills will focus on fortifying and defending them, and this time with new weapons. Taiwan has introduced some new toys for its drill, like the HIMARS, made by Lockheed Martin. These are American rocket systems. Ukraine is using them well against Russia. Another new weapon is the Abrams tank. Taiwan bought 38 of them from the US last year. 38 tanks. They will be key to repelling a ground invasion. Today, a couple of Abrams were seen in action. They fired at moving targets in an army training ground. Take a look. Taiwan's president saw the Abrams in action. His name is Lai Ching-te. He arrived in a combat helmet and vest. He also spoke to the soldiers to boost their morale.
The more training there is in peacetime, the more combat strength the Taiwan military will have. With every increase in the military's combat power, the nation and its people gain an extra layer of security. When the country is more secure, the region will also have more peace and stability.
And how is China reacting? They have called these drills a self-deceiving trick. They say no weapons will prevail over the Chinese army.
We solemnly warn the DPP authorities that seeking independence by force is a dead end. Whatever subjects they drill and whatever weapons they use, the PLA's resolute countermeasures against Taiwan independence would not be deterred, nor would the overwhelming and irresistible trend of China's national reunification be stopped.
So that's where we stand. Taiwan is preparing to deter an invasion. China says it won't help you. But how serious is the invasion threat right now? When will Xi Jinping pull the trigger? There are multiple assessments. The US has long talked about the year 2027. They feel that's when Beijing will launch an invasion on Taiwan in 2027. And why is that? Well, it's more symbolic than strategic. You see, 2027 marks the 100th anniversary of the Chinese army. It would also mark the 21st Communist Party Congress. That's when Xi Jinping is expected to get a fourth term as president. Though frankly, it's a bit of a stretch. Xi will likely strike when he's ready, whenever he's ready, when he feels that there is a 100% chance of success. And how will he make that decision? We can think of three factors. Number one, when his military has enough equipment, specifically amphibious assault ships. These are warships that can land soldiers and weapons on foreign shores. China has 4 of them, 4 such ships. In comparison, the US has 9. Now, Beijing could turn to civilian ships as well, but those would be sitting ducks for Taiwan's missiles. So that's his first checklist. Enough landing vessels, that's what he needs. Number 2, when Xi Jinping has enough details about Taiwan's defense. And that's why the Chinese are always probing them. They stage massive drills near Taiwan's waters. They send jets across the airspace. All of this is designed to probe Taiwan's defenses, to gather details about their possible response. Which brings us to the final factor, the third factor, America's response. Xi Jinping would love it if Washington was engaged in a war elsewhere, perhaps in West Asia. If not, he would like clarity on how the US would respond. Would the Americans defend Taiwan? Or would they simply arm Taiwan? Now, with Donald Trump, you never know. He talks about ending endless wars, but he very nearly started one against Iran. Also, there's a new report out. It talks about Trump's previous conversations with Xi Jinping. Apparently, Trump had warned Xi Jinping against invading Taiwan. He threatened to bomb Beijing if Taiwan was attacked. Reports say Trump made a similar threat to Vladimir Putin as well against invading Ukraine. Now, we cannot confirm these reports. Maybe it's classic Trump bluster, or maybe he's serious about attacking. Either way, that confusion does not help Xi Jinping, because chances are he will have to fight alone. On the other side, the US has built a partnership in Asia. Many countries in the region are America's treaty allies. You have Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. If needed, they will fight with America. But who will fight with Xi Jinping? All these factors will influence his decision. He will probably get one shot at doing this. If he succeeds, political immortality awaits him. If he fails, utter humiliation. Vantage continues after a short break.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
US President Donald Trump on Wednesday announced a 50% tariff on all Brazilian products starting from August 1st. He also called the trial of former President Bolsonaro a witch hunt and an international disgrace. Now Trump accused Brazil of undermining free elections and American free speech through secret censorship orders. He has also said that a 50% tariff on all Brazilian goods would begin August 1st. Now this didn't sit well with Brazilian President Lula da Silva, who has lashed out at Donald Trump. This is the breaking input that we are getting for you, where we are learning that US President Donald Trump has now imposed 50% tariff on all the Brazilian products, and this will start from August 1st. I'm being joined by CNN News 18's Akansha Swaroop. Akansha, what would have prompted Donald Trump to impose a 50% tariff on Brazil?
Right. Remember, he's really been riled up by the Brazilian President Lula da Silva, and we all know that this is also being used now as a pressure tactic by the U.S. President, who's now also referred to how his predecessor, Lula da Silva's predecessor, Jair, who's the far-right leader, Jair Bolsonaro, has been a victim of a witch hunt. Donald Trump called on Brazilian authorities to halt Bolsonaro's prosecution over an alleged coup attempt. And of course, we all know that it was Brazil that played host to the recently concluded BRICS summit, where the declaration also not just mentioned the rising tariffs, but also condemned the airstrikes on Iran. And that was a direct reference to the United States and Israel both. But most importantly, it was the Brazilian president, Ayusha, who actually condemned the U.S. president for the tariffs when he directly hit out saying that the world does not need an emperor. So this kind of a spat that we are seeing between the Brazilian president and the U.S. president has been in the making for quite a few days. Remember, Donald Trump has slapped 50% tariffs, and in that letter that he...
We've been telling you about the war in West Asia, Israel versus its enemies. It began as a war on land, but now it is dominating the high seas, particularly the Red Sea. It is one of the world's most vital shipping routes. 15% of the global trade passes through the Red Sea, and now it is coming under attack. Ships here are being hit by missiles. They're being sunk to the bottom. And behind all this chaos are Yemen's Houthis. In the last 1 week alone, they have sunk 2 ships in the Red Sea. 4 people were killed in the attack. Search is underway for the other crew members, and trade and security are being held hostage. Our next report tells you what this means for the world.
In the summer of 2025, the waters off Yemen are no longer just a shipping route. They are a war zone, one without front lines, but full of fire. Ships don't just pass through anymore. They hope to make it in one piece. In just 1 week, the Houthi rebels have claimed 2 more commercial ships in Red Sea. The Magic Seas and Eternity Sea. The first ship, Eternity Sea, was hit, boarded, and blown up in textbook pirate fashion. The Houthis released dramatic footage of the attack, complete with megaphone announcements telling the crew to evacuate.
We're back to rescue all of you. Don't worry, I confirm.
They even claimed to have provided medical care to the rescued crew. But US officials tell a darker story. The crew weren't saved, they were kidnapped. The second ship was struck by drones and rocket-propelled grenades. It was then chased down by boats, and then, according to the Houthis, liberated of its Israeli trajectory. 4 people have been killed. 10 members were rescued. The search for survivors is underway.
The Yemeni Houthi armed forces affirm they will continue to prevent Israeli navigation in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. They renew their warning to all companies dealing with the ports of occupied Palestine that their ships and crews will be targeted in any area within the reach of the armed forces, regardless of the ship's destination.
The attacks began in late 2023, after Israel launched its military campaign in Gaza. The Houthis, perched on Yemen's western coast, declared themselves the maritime wing of resistance. Their goal? To choke Israel's sea lifelines and punish nations who aided it. Since November 2023, the Houthis have attacked over 70 vessels. It started in solidarity with Gaza, but by mid-2024, the attacks had grown more precise, more frequent, and far more lethal. The Houthis claim they're only targeting Israeli-linked vessels, but that link is often murky. Shipping giants now face a bitter choice: risk their ships and their crews through the increasingly lawless waters off Yemen, or reroute around Africa at an enormous cost. And this is very important. The Red Sea isn't just any body of water. It's a choke point. Nearly 15% of global seaborne trade moves through the Suez Canal at the northern tip. That means what happens in these waters ripples out across the world. Prices could spike. Insurance premiums already have. Supply chains grown. For Israel, the attacks are part of a broader multi-front pressure campaign. For the Houthis, it's a stage on which to project regional power. And for everyone else, it's a terrifying new normal. The Houthis have turned this narrow sea into a geopolitical minefield. Their message is simple: if you side with Israel, nowhere on the water is safe. And despite a US-led naval coalition, a surge in airstrikes, and global condemnation, they're still striking, still filming, still daring the world to stop them. Because the war in Gaza may be thousands of miles away, but in the Red Sea, it's being fought one ship at a time.
What happens when you put a frog into boiling water? It jumps out. But what if you put it in tepid water, then slowly bring it to boil? The frog is cooked to death. I know it's dark, but this is a famous metaphor for ignoring your problems until it is too late to escape the consequences. Lately, this increasingly applies to one leader, William Ruto, the president of Kenya, the East African country. Ruto won power about 3 years ago, and he was elected on a promise. He vowed to protect the poor, to improve the well-being of young Kenyans. But has he lived up to it? If you ask the people of Kenya, in all likelihood, the answer will be a resounding no. People are frustrated, the cost of living is high, there is unemployment, corruption, police brutality. It is a long list of problems. So over time, anger has piled up. Things have spiraled, tensions have boiled, while Ruto has only grown more and more tone deaf.
Don't kill them, but should shoot them in the legs so they break and they can go to hospital on their way to court.
Shoot them in the legs, that's what Ruto has said. And who is he talking to? The police of Kenya. And who is he talking about? Not terrorists, not criminals, but protesters. Ruto's ire is directed towards demonstrators. To understand why, let's go back. The Kenyan economy has struggled for years now. Previous governments borrowed money left, right and center from China, from the World Bank, from the International Monetary Fund. Amid this, funds were mismanaged by corrupt governments. And all of this brought Kenya's economy to its knees. William Ruto came to power promising to change this. But he had a Herculean task ahead of him. He inherited a crumbling, debt-laden economy. And he wanted to fix it with taxes. Ruto asked citizens to quote-unquote bear the pain of taxes to grow the economy. And last year he proposed a finance bill. But this bill would have increased the cost of essentials. So in the month of June last year, protests broke out. A youth-led movement swept Kenya. People took to the streets, the government cracked down, police clashed with the protesters, at least 60 people were killed. Reports say many were abducted and tortured. Eventually, on the 25th of June, this culminated in people storming the Kenyan parliament, and Ruto scrambled to make things right. He was forced to withdraw the tax bill and he dismissed nearly all of his cabinet. It was seen as a major win for the people. But it did little to assuage public anger because problems have persisted, particularly police brutality. So what started as an anti-tax protest transformed into something bigger. In June this year, 2025, a teacher died in police custody. His crime? Criticizing a senior police official on social media. Soon after this, people took to the streets again. They were protesting police violence. During this protest, the police shot at a bystander, a hawker who was at close range. And this further angered the public. Then came June 25th. Kenyans took to the streets again on the anniversary of last year's protests. This too turned violent. At least 19 people were killed. This week on Monday, Kenyans took to the streets yet again to commemorate the country's struggle for democracy, which is an annual affair. But this year, the protest turned deadly. The police clashed with the protesters. They opened fire. They used tear gas, water cannons, rubber bullets. At least 31 people died. More than 100 were injured. More than 500 arrested. At least 2 hospitals were damaged. Thousands of businesses were destroyed. Looting was widespread. And this only worsened the situation.
Who killed our young people in the last year, Mandamanos, they have not been brought to account for their actions. They are continuing to perpetrate murder against their citizens. A government that has turned itself into a terrorist unit against its own people must not be called a government.
Now, rights groups are demanding an investigation. Opposition leaders are accusing Ruto. They say the government deployed armed gangs during the protests and they were the ones behind the looting. The government was behind the looting to hurt businesses and to discredit the protesters. That is the charge. But Ruto has defended police action repeatedly and now he has made his toughest remarks yet. He has given the police a free pass to shoot and incapacitate protesters. He has called the protest an attack on security forces, a declaration of war against the country. And this has fueled massive outcry. Kenya heads to polls in 2027. That's when the country will elect their new government. And ahead of the polls, protesters are braving police batons nearly every other week. The death toll is mounting. The people have taken up a rallying cry, Ruto one term, meaning Ruto one term. Most Kenyans want him out. The president has less than 2 years to endear himself to the disillusioned public. Ruto has tried to fix the economy, to create more jobs. He has called out corruption, but for Kenyans, it's like their president has tried to increase taxes while people don't have jobs. And when they speak up, the president hardens his anti-protest rhetoric. So Kenya is fast approaching a boiling point and Ruto has chosen to fight fire with fire. Will this be his reckoning? As they say, only time will tell. Have you wondered how diplomacy looked in the 1800s? We did not have a lot of cameras then, so all we can do is imagine. Of course, there is another option. Just look at any state visit to the UK because their traditions are still stuck there in the 1800s. This week, the UK is hosting French President Emmanuel Macron. The trip is coming after a long time. The last state visit by a French president to the UK was in the year 2008. After that, we had the Brexit fiasco. So this trip is all about a reset, which is why London dusted out its old relics. I'm talking about the royals. Macron was welcomed at Windsor Castle by King Charles. It had everything you would expect, from horse-drawn carriages to royal bands. Take a look at this. Macron then headed to London. He addressed a joint session of the British Parliament and he spoke about a lot of things. He called Brexit a deeply regrettable choice. He called for reducing dependency on the US and he promised to forge a strong UK-France alliance.
First of all, of course, because the sovereign British people choose to leave the European Union in 2016, a decision that we respect, even if we found it deeply regrettable. If we compare our countries with the United States. But we will have as well to de-risk our two countries for the excessive dependencies on both the US and China.
Then it was banquet time. Macron attended two state dinners on Tuesday and Wednesday night. The first one was at Windsor. It was a grand event. The table alone took 6 days to set up. Both King Charles and President Macron made speeches. Then they raised a toast and tucked in. Then yesterday, Macron left Windsor Castle. He met Prime Minister Keir Starmer in London. They held one-on-one talks at 10 Downing Street. Then today, they met again, this time for a formal summit with delegations. Both leaders are expected to sign an agreement by the end of it. It will cover defense, borders and Ukraine. Tonight, we're focusing on one aspect of it, which is nuclear coordination. The European continent only has two nuclear powers, France and Britain. Both countries have big plans for their arsenal. They want to create a coordinated nuclear deterrent. Now, what does that mean? Say there is an extreme threat to Europe, maybe an invasion or a nuclear hit. Then France and the UK will join hands. They will make their nuclear weapons work in tandem. Basically, there will be a joint nuclear response. Of course, this raises many questions. Like, what threat would trigger such a response? Would a conventional attack suffice? Does it have to be a nuclear attack? Now, we don't have clarity on any of that yet, but here's what we do know. The nuclear arsenals will remain independent, meaning the French nukes will remain under the French president's control and the British nukes will remain under the British Prime Minister's control. They're coordinating, not combining. Still, this is a big move. It could be the first step towards a European nuclear umbrella. Right now, most of Europe is defended by the US. They have placed nukes in multiple European nations, like in Belgium, Germany and Italy. But with Donald Trump, there is uncertainty. Would he use these nukes to defend Europe, or would he stand on the sidelines to avoid this question? Some European leaders want a European umbrella. French President Macron proposed it. German Chancellor Merz is open to it, and clearly so is British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. This announcement could be a first step towards that, a European nuclear umbrella. But will it be enough? Let's look at the numbers first. The US has more than 5,000 nuclear warheads. Out of these, around 100 are in Europe. In comparison, France has 290 warheads and Britain has 225. So in terms of numbers, this is not an issue. In fact, it rarely is with nukes. Even one nuke is enough for deterrence. Having said that, two questions do remain. One, can Europe match America's conventional military power? That's where the US draws its dominance from. Russia has more nukes than the US, but the US is a much stronger conventional military. So that is one point to consider. Number two, will this deterrence work in practice? You see, nuclear umbrellas always sound good in theory. You nuke my ally, I will nuke you back. That's the idea. But will countries walk the talk? Will Macron risk a Paris for Berlin? Will Starmer risk London for Brussels? That's another question for Europeans to ponder. Either way, one thing is quite clear. Europe is looking at a future beyond American protection. It may not come tomorrow, but they're planning for it. Vantage continues after a short break.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
US President Donald Trump on Wednesday announced a 50% tariff on all Brazilian products starting from August 1st. He also called the trial of former President Bolsonaro a witch hunt and an international disgrace. Now, Trump accused Brazil of undermining free elections and American free speech through secret censorship orders. He has also said that a 50% tariff on all Brazilian goods would begin August 1st. Now, this didn't sit well with Brazilian President Lula da Silva, who has lashed out at Donald Trump. This is the breaking input that we are getting for you, where we are learning that US President Donald Trump has now imposed 50% tariff on all the Brazilian products, and this will start from August 1st. I'm being joined by CNN News 18's Akansha Swaroop. Akansha, what would have prompted Donald Trump to impose a 50% tariff on Brazil?
Right. Remember, he's really been riled up by the Brazilian President Lula da Silva, and we all know that this is also being used now as a pressure tactic by the US President, who's now also referred to how his predecessor, Lula da Silva's predecessor, who's the far-right leader, Jair Bolsonaro, has been a victim of a witch hunt. Donald Trump called on Brazilian authorities to halt Bolsonaro's prosecution over an alleged coup attempt. And of course, we all know that it was Brazil that played host to the recently concluded BRICS summit, where the declaration also not just mentioned the rising tariffs, but also condemned the airstrikes on Iran. And that was a direct reference to the United States and Israel both. But most importantly, it was the Brazilian president, Ayusha, who actually condemned the US president for the tariffs when he directly hit out, saying that the world does not need an emperor. So this kind of a spat that we are seeing between the Brazilian president and the US president has been in the making for quite a few days. Remember, Donald Trump has slapped 50% tariffs, and in that letter that he's addressed to the Brazilian president, he also goes on to talk about how if Brazil chooses to come up with reciprocal tariffs, which as the Brazilian president already has announced in that post that he's taken a shot on X, because he said, according to the Brazilian president, their own rule of reciprocity will kick in after these 50% tariffs being slapped by the United States. And so the US president to that has already made it amply clear that depending on whatever reciprocal tariffs Brazil slaps them with, there will be additional 50% tariffs to this. Now, remember, the Brazilian president has already highlighted that as far as the talk of trade deficit is concerned, that is false, because they already have a trade surplus of close to $450 billion with the United States. So Brazil's Lula is not mincing any words, or he's not going to be bowed down by the US president. He's taking him head on in that entire post.
We've all heard the word guru, but do you know what it means? Guru is a Sanskrit word. The gu in guru stands for darkness, and ru means removal of darkness. So a guru is someone who dispels darkness, someone who enlightens us, imparts value, teaches us, helps guide us. And for this, gurus have a special place in India's rich cultural legacy. But for too long, many of us seem to have misunderstood this. You see, the oldest references go back to the earliest Vedic texts. They say that a guru is not just a teacher, a guru is a mentor, a guide, an expert, or a master. It could be anyone who imparts knowledge, anyone who inspires or molds us. So every year, we get the opportunity to honor our gurus. I'm talking about Guru Purnima. India is celebrating it today. According to Hindu mythology, this is a sacred opportunity. It is observed on the full moon day of Ashad, that is a month in the Hindu calendar. And as per Hindu mythology, on this day, Lord Shiv imparted knowledge to the Saptarishis, the 7 sages. Guru Purnima is unique to India. Historically, this day has been an important festival in the country. It marks the beginning of a 4-month-long holy period when monks and sages stay in one place to teach their disciples. It is considered a crucial time to boost focus. But over time, Guru Purnima has been relegated to the background. Many of us have even forgotten about it. Although the fact is, it is just as important to have a guru today as it was centuries ago. Look at our teachers. They shape us in innumerable ways. And you probably know this already. Have you ever fallen in love with a subject because you love the teacher? If yes, then you're not alone. Good teachers can change the course of our lives, and research proves this. Having a good primary school teacher makes a student more likely to go to college and more likely to earn a higher income later on. The influence of a teacher never really ends. And this applies to mentors too. Research shows that good mentors help employees climb the management ladder. And it's not just about learning skills or gaining knowledge. It is about being shaped as an individual. That's what gurus do. They shape you. And humans have known this for generations now. In ancient India, we had gurukuls. Think of them as centers of learning where the pupils stayed with the teacher. Life and education was one. Students learned everything from law to maths, from archery to meditation. In ancient China, teaching curriculums centered around morality. In ancient Egypt, priests taught with rigorous methods, and learning came with lessons on life. And yes, even today we celebrate our teachers the world over. World Teachers' Day is held on the 5th of October. India marks Teachers' Day on 5th September. In China, it's 10th September. In Korea, it's the 15th of May. In the US, there is National Teacher Appreciation Week. So we continue to honor our teachers. But this Guru Purnima, maybe we can do more. Reflect, reach out to our parents who taught us how to walk, our school teachers who held a mirror to us, that one boss who gave us a place in the sun, or that gym trainer who kept pushing us. Anyone could be your guru. So today we say thank you for your passion, your contribution, and sometimes even your anger and punishment.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Big breaking news coming in that will send shudders through the Congress camp. Shashi Tharoor, the Congress MP, is once again set to irk the Congress High Command after slamming Indira Gandhi government for the 1975 emergency. Shashi Tharoor has stated that India has moved from a left-of-centre policy to a more muscular nationalist policy, which places a premium on charismatic and centralized leadership, a clear praise of the Modi government's action against terror. Listen in to what the Congress MP had to say as this fresh statement coming in from the Trivandrum MP is set to irk the Congress High Command once again.
As India engages strategically with an increasingly multipolar